All right, time to make a response video for the controversy stirring within the non-duality community. What's a good community without controversy, right? So if you are not aware of what I'm talking about, don't even worry about it. I know it's interesting. You probably want to hear the rest of this just because like controversies get us all excited. But if you haven't had direct contact with it, it doesn't even matter. But enough people have, and enough people have reached out to me and asked me questions about this that I'm going to just make a response video because I'm just going to keep getting them. I already know this, and I'm kind of saying the same thing to everybody in private. But it's better just to make a sort of response video because. This sort of issue, it's not a huge controversy, but it's a sort of a thing you'll see as I unpack it. But the issue is lends itself to some really important teaching points that I've made many times and I will continue to make. And I just want to address it from that standpoint. I kind of have a policy. I don't talk about anyone specific online. I don't talk about other teachers or other people's realization. Generally speaking, I just don't do that. Because it's their business and whatever. So, but in this case, I'm not going to name any names actually, but anyone who knows what I'm talking about already will immediately know who I'm talking about. That's just the way it is. So, the way this came about for me was, I guess a couple of weeks ago, people started sending me, actually I saw it in comments first. People were commenting on my videos saying there's someone out there sowing doubt and they think that all of this is depersonalization and what do you think of that? And, I kind of answer like DPDR has a certain sort of set of diagnostic criteria. Here's what it looks like. Here's what it is. Here's how it can overlap in some ways with the experience of presence or deeper realization or whatever. And even meditative practices can lead to it and on and on. But many people with DPDR don't arrive at that state or arrive in that state because of meditation or because of spiritual practices. Often it's a medication, or they start an SSRI, or they stop an SSRI, or they have a stressful experience, or they just tend to disassociate in life in stressful situations. So yeah, I kind of answered those questions, and I've answered it in videos actually, the difference between depersonalization, derealization, and non-dual or insight practice and so forth. But these questions started coming up on videos very specifically maybe a month ago now or so. And they're like, oh, there's a prominent teacher out there who's saying this and that. And it was kind of vague. I didn't even know who it was and I didn't really care. And then I started getting very specific messages from people sending me like screenshots of forums and things. And I don't think this was quite public, but this was on a forum where many people read this stuff who watch my stuff, who watch Josh's stuff, who watch other non-dual teachers' stuff, and are on this sort of spiritual path, so to speak, doing this kind of work. So, but these messages I got were very specific. Like there were some that were definitely mentioning Josh by name. They were mentioning me by name. And essentially saying like we're misleading people and these sorts of things, which is fine. Of course, if you look around online, you'll find that about me or any prominent teacher in various places. There's a lot of confusion out there, and that's not new. These were very specific though, and a couple of them really concerned me because they were just so inaccurate. So one of the things I saw was this person had said to a good-sized group of people, I think, that the many people or most people on my playlist of people I've interviewed about awakening are on antidepressants, are severely depressed, and their lives are just unmanageable, right? This is coming from someone I don't even know. I don't even know this person. I think he interviewed me a couple of years ago. I've seen a few of his videos. I kind of have a sense of where he is on things in realization and so forth. But I thought that's, first of all, extremely pretentious. It's totally misleading. I don't know the medication list of people I interview for awakening, so certainly he doesn't. But I also know many of these people very well, and many of them have very deep realization, very stable and clear realization, and they're deeply compassionate people. They're living lives of deep peace and profound interconnection. Like, there is shadow stuff people go through, of course, with all this, and I talk about it. But to say that is just so misleading and so inaccurate, and it's just sowing doubt for no reason. And I sense there's probably some competitive nature going on there and all that, but I still didn't feel like responding publicly. I was just kind of like, whatever, people are going to say what they're going to say. But yeah, so there was some messages about that. There were some messages about, again, Josh being misleading, me being misleading, et cetera. So that's kind of been building in the background. I still didn't think of making like a public response video because I don't think this is a particularly prominent person, but they have a following. So, and then they released a video that I got like almost immediately 2 different people asking me about it. What do I think of this? What does it mean? What is it about? How accurate is it? Within just a couple of hours of the video being there. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to get this daily by multiple people. I don't want to say the same thing over and over to every single person who sends this to me. So I'll just make a response video. If anyone wants to watch the rest of this, if they don't know about it, you can, but it doesn't really matter. It's not that pertinent to you. If you have watched this video or heard these things and you're confused by any of this, then maybe this video will be helpful to you. So yeah, back to my sort of personal standard. I really try not to mention people by name, but because these things have been said publicly now on a video, I might sort of allude to some of these motifs and what I think might have been going on with this person. It is what it is. So, so first of all, let me just say this. For me, this realization process and these deep insights, non-dual, no self-realization insights, were 25 plus years ago. Many, many years ago. There's been many years of integration of this. I didn't talk about this for so long, largely because I didn't want to confuse people. So this stuff gets very nuanced. There's so many traps in it. There's so many ways to confuse yourself and others. And becoming a teacher too early is a very, very good way to do it. So that's how it played out for me. That was my instinct. When I wrote my book, one of the major reasons I wrote my book was because there was so much confusion out there. I could see it. I could see it online. I could see it in the forums. I could see it in people. There's still so much confusion. But what I tried to do is make a channel, make a platform, make a book where people, if you are confused, come here. And I tried to make it comprehensive, talk about the different stages of realization, talk about shadow work, give you resources, show you teachers, all of the things. I tried to really make a place where if you're really interested in this process in earnest, you have resources. I'm not the only resource. There are other good resources out there. But again, there's so much confusion. One of the reasons there's so much confusion is people try to teach so early. You have an awakening, a first awakening, and you think it's non-duality. You think it's non-dual realization. You think it's, no self-realization because you read about it and you think that's what it is, and it's not. You're just getting started, and this is basic Zen. You have a Kensho awakening in Zen. Your teacher tells you this is just the beginning. You're just getting started. You would in a million years think about going out and teaching, right? But now we have YouTube. So people have awakenings, they start teaching, start talking about it. When you first have an awakening, that first awakening, it's so profound, like the clarity is there. You actually feel rather enlightened in a sense, or people around you may perceive that. And that might work for a while, actually. There'll be a charisma, there'll be, this kind of fluidity and flow to things, and you're transmitting, right? People buy it and they think you really have the deep wisdom. What you don't have is the deep wisdom. What you have is direct insight, and you have the entry point to the spiritual path, And once you have that entry point, you do have a sort of direct connection to truth, a sort of living truth, but it's not mature at all, and the deeper insights aren't there. So what happens often is you can get a following, you can get people who buy into what you're saying and believe you and trust you, and then that can go crazy in all kinds of ways. When you start hitting shadow work in a deep way, you start hitting existential fear, existential terror, you start having shifts into deeper realization and not sure what's happening. Things can go off the rails quick, right? So it's probably not the best thing to be teaching, when these are very fresh or new insights for you, generally speaking, right? Unless a teacher that has walked this path, has deep and established insight, asks you to, is probably the best way to go there. Anyway, this is why I say that. Like, this is why I put it in my book. This is why I caution people. It's not so like I can be the expert. It's not to be elitist. It's really for the practitioner themselves. Because when you go out and start engaging the public, and they believe that you are a authority, right? A spiritual authority because of your insight that they can feel from you, they'll believe you, and then you can really confuse them, right? Now, what I'm talking about with this person is not this extreme case, but just randomly, I have recently watched the 3-part series, which is awesome. If you want to check it out I found it free on YouTube. I think it's How I Started a Cult by Andrew Cohen, or about Andrew Cohen. It's not by him, but he's in it. You can see. And it's really fascinating. It looks to me like he actually had an awakening. He knew Papaji, he met Papaji. It looks like he really did have an awakening. And he's very charismatic. And so with that awakening, he noticed, oh, wow, people really respond and they're having experiences themselves. And they started following him around. And he pretty quickly decided he was Jesus, right? He was Buddha. And that's really what he kind of perceived. And so had this massive following and whatever. People were maybe having experiences and shifting and to some degree. And then the heavy shadow stuff came, but he completely avoided any work, right? He actually would say, I don't have a shadow, I think, from what they said in this documentary. And that went completely off the rails, not just confusing people about spirituality or something. I mean, he became a maniac, like he became an egotistic maniac, and the whole thing became extremely toxic. And, it just goes on and on. It's a cult, right? The typical cult story. But that's just one example of like, you have no idea what's coming after an initial shift, an initial awakening. Best is to be humble, continue to practice, trust those who have come before you, and do not try to be an expert. Like that's your best bet of clarifying the deeper aspects of realization. That is your best bet. But unfortunately, again, we're in the age of YouTube, we're in the age of social media, and it's rather natural for people just to start making channels or talking about it publicly. Even people who've already had channels, right? Then it makes sense to talk about the next thing that's happening in your life. And it's fine. It is what it is. I'm not going to rail on that, but that's what happens. But it can be very, very confusing to people when they start to feel like you're some kind of spiritual authority and you're just at the beginning of the process. That's what I wanted to say about that. What else do I want to say about this? No, I thought I had something else to say in that general sort of trope, but I don't anymore. Not available. Okay. So that's kind of the preamble to this. The other part would be also when you've had that shift and you've had initial shift and you're sort of in that place of equanimity and peace. Very often, I mean, I've watched this first awakening I'm talking about. I've watched and engaged with and worked through this with many, many people. I don't even know how many. Many, many, many people. So many people. And what happens often is right after it, you do kind of start transmitting. There's just something about you that does that, right? And often it's because you've been in spiritual circles and you might talk about it like, oh, I had this shift. And people are like, ooh, you had a shift. And then, they can feel it. And it's not uncommon, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just what happens. There's something that just sort of transmits naturally and spontaneously. What I've found in my experience of interacting with someone right after awakening is many people notice that. Not everybody says it, but many people notice it and they point it out. They're like, oh yeah, there's this friend that's asking me questions now. And, some of them ask me what I think about it. Like, what do you think I should do about this? Some of them don't ask me. They just sort of tell me that's happening. And in either case, I usually caution people. At that time, I'm like, it may feel very spontaneous. It may feel very fluid to you to talk about this to people or even take on a position as their kind of mentor in some way. But I strongly recommend you do not do that because you're not honoring your own insight at this point. By doing that, you're going to get distracted, and it's going to be far more heavy than you realize. It's going to be far more confusing than you realize for you. It's going to put you in a place that's very challenging sometimes even to get out of. Now, I would say the majority of people do notice something like that. They notice that they have this kind of effect on others around them, but they will tell me very outright without me asking. They're like, I do not want to talk about this. Like, I know I'm not ready to talk about this. I know, they have a reverence for the process, like a deep reverence. And what I sense when I hear that from people is a maturity. Like they have a natural maturity that, yes, kind of like I did. Like this is a very, it's the most powerful, deep, and pervasive transformation you can go through in this lifetime, period. And you just went through it like a week ago. Why would you teach it? Why would you talk about it? Just let it deepen, let it clarify, let it mature over years, And at some point, if life really wants you to be a teacher, it will tap you on the shoulder. It'll either push you into it or someone will ask you or something, but that's later on. That's after some maturity, right? If you want to be a teacher at that point, what I've found that's almost always it's pretty much always being co-opted. There's a co-opting going on that you are not going to be aware of until it's got you in its grip. And the co-opting is the want for validation, the need for validation, the want for love, the want for attention. It's just going to, take over at some point, and it'll be really kind of unfortunate for you. So in those cases, like I said, when I'm working directly with someone or they reach out to me after awakening, most of them just feel like, no way I would teach this or talk about this. And that's great. That's mature. Some people are kind of like wanting to know, should I? And I discourage it. I really do. Occasionally I'll have someone really push me, like they really want me to endorse it, or too early. And I know it's too early. And I just keep saying, no, I can't endorse it. I can't tell you what to do, but I'm not going to endorse that. So others, I guess, doesn't even cross their mind. They have an awakening and they just talk about it. This is the spiritual marketplace we're in. This is the world we're in of social media, online Dharma, and so forth. There are tremendously more benefits, in my opinion, to online Dharma than there are to traditional Dharma in general. There's some major drawback to traditional Dharma. But one of the benefits is, in traditional Dharma, you would never in a million years start teaching until somebody endorses it or asks you to, or you've really matured your insight, hopefully. But at the very least, there's been some maturing, hopefully, and that sort of thing. So in this space, it doesn't matter. Anyone can say anything, and people, including people who've never had an awakening, by the way, and that happens a lot too. So again, all this confusion, and this is really why I do what I do. It's a big part of why I do what I do. And so, yeah, that's the kind of the context for what I'm going to talk about. I've talked about this in other videos, but I'll touch on it again. That there is a sort of crossover to some degree between depersonalization, derealization, and deeper insights, formless insights, insight of non-duality, insight of no self. But they're definitely not the same thing. If somebody, I've worked with many people with DPDR, one-on-one, not necessarily in an awakening spectrum, but because they were just suffering so much and they didn't have direction, they didn't know what to do about it, and often they were even non-amenable to therapy. They didn't want traditional therapy. They didn't want to go in and talk to somebody about DPDR. They didn't even think it was DPDR. They had other terms for it. And I've really worked with a lot of people in this space, and it's a very challenging space to work with people in, because there are aspects of the tendency of someone to dissociate that can be really challenging to work with. But that's not the point of this. The point of this is, I want to say, it's universally uncomfortable. It's universally has the sense of, this is not right. Something's really not right here. I would probably summarize it as it's probably more of a biological process or a physiologic process of dorsal vagal shutdown. If you read about dorsal vagal shutdown or like a profound freeze state, it's very much like that. And that's really, I think, at the core of what depersonalization, derealization, especially severe forms of it, are. With that said, I've had people who are on the awakening spectrum. They're going through awakening or even have had an awakening, and they have a tendency toward DPDR. The majority of people don't, I find. The majority of people who go through awakening don't have the propensity for it or tendency toward it. Some have never experienced it in any form. Probably most have never experienced it in any form, but there's crossover. Like some certainly have and even have that tendency. That's their reaction to stress. Their reaction to fear is to depersonalize, disassociate, derealize, right? It's fine. It's a physiologic response, but it's not realization. It just isn't, right? So I want to be clear about that. I've heard another teacher say that DPDR is the evil twin of awakening or something. But the point is, it's not awakening. And it's also not non-dual realization. Non-dual realization, when it's mature, and even no self-realization, when it's mature, there's not a fear or feeling that something's wrong, something's missing, something is off. There's actually a very profound, deep, and ongoing conviction that this is exactly how reality is, the only way reality could be. And there's very important, notable elements that are not there, that are there when the illusory sense of self, the illusory sense of separation, form, and so forth is there. So it's a when someone has clear and mature, no self-realization, we don't have to have this kind of conversation. They might fight it for a very short time, but it's that's even questioning that the realization itself was super clear. If the realization is super clear, it stabilizes, and it's it's simply and obviously the case that this is the nature of appearance. This is the nature of experience. This is the nature of the unconditioned. And there's no sense of trying to get out of it. There's no sense of it being problematic. There's no sense of denying the conventional self, of course, right? You don't walk around like a ghost saying, oh, there's no body, there's no one here. Like that's not it either. So there's a very, very different experiential dimension to deep realization, which I would call no self and non-dual, and depersonalization, derealization. They're not the same thing. The suggestion by this teacher is that this isn't a teacher. The suggestion by this person is that myself, or at least a lot of people I interview, Josh and some others, or maybe actually like a lot of non-dual people that are online, that we're confusing derealization, depersonalization with true no self-realization or anatta. And that's wrong because the confusion is on their part. They're confusing the two. That's the issue. That is the issue. They're literally confusing depersonalization or derealization, which they experienced, with the insight itself. That's what I see happening. And that's okay. It happens. People get confused about things. It takes years for this to really clarify what all is going on and settle in. So with that said, the mechanism of this that I think, I'm not going to say is what happened with this person, but I'm just saying what can happen. What I've seen is often what happens is someone has a deep awakening. And like I said, you're in such a honeymoon period. It's such a fluid state. And then you read about non-duality, you read about no self, you read about all this stuff, and it just sounds like what's happening. You're like, oh yeah, it's all clear, non-dual, everything's interconnected. It's all, you might even say it's all the self, a capital S or something. But all of the teachings, no matter how they're described and what traditions they come from, they all sound right, because there's something about awakening that's all encompassing. It seems to just incorporate everything all the time. It's so fluid and interpenetrated and beautiful, and it feels that way, right? But again, this is first awakening. This is the beginning, and so you can actually believe you've had non-dual realization at that point. You might really think you know what non-dual is experientially, and you don't. And this happens to people a lot, actually. Or most people don't even know. They're not really looking at things in stages and reading about deeper realization and trying to extrapolate it. But the nature of online Dharma is people talk about this stuff so much now that you can read about the deeper realization. You think that's what's happening with your initial realization. I've seen this a lot. And you can be really surprised later on, A, how much shadow work you're going to be doing, and B, what it really feels like when non-dual starts to dawn. It can be very surprising. Most people, if they've done a lot of shadow work and they don't tend to dissociate, find non-dual realization like incredible. Like, for me it was, but I had suffered so tremendously my whole life that there was, anyway, but find it just like you won the cosmic lottery. Like, it's incredible. And sometimes the first time you taste it, you'll have a massive fear response, like an existential terror response. Well, I've seen people have this exact response to it the first time they taste it. Very sincere practitioners, people who have deep realization, people who have deep insight. And when they first taste non-dual, it's like they back out. They're like, whoa, that's too much. Like, you feel like you're disappearing into reality. You feel like reality is completely obliterating you. You think you want interconnection, or you think you want complete lack of boundaries and form until you taste it. And it's like, what the fuck? And I've talked about this in my videos. I would call it existential terror, and it can be very, very freaky, in the moment. And it's an emotion. It is an emotion. It's a fear response. But when you feel fear unbound, just like you're experiencing everything else unbound, you can be surprised how intense fear is. Yeah. Now, if somebody goes through that kind of thing and they have a teacher, they're working with someone, they're taking counsel from someone who is not endorsing that they're already enlightened, or that they have, this deep, deep insight. And this is just part of the path, and this teacher has walked the path before them. Usually they'll just help them through this. They'll just settle them and say, it's okay. It's an experience. Don't worry about it. The experience may not be the non-dual aspect. That may be tasting reality unfiltered. The experience is the you that's trying to reconstitute itself, that's trying to formulate a sense of a self apart from the experience, that is actually being used to avoid the intense fear And that's the one that's having the experience. And from its point of view, it's kind of horrendous. Like, that's not what you want, right? No one wants that. It's kind of what I say. No one wants non-dual, or really no self-realization. No one really wants that from the point of view of the one that thinks it is the one seeking it, right? It's this weird paradox, but it's very obvious. With that one out of the way, then there's no problems anymore. Like, it's over. It's not an issue. None of this is an issue. But when you're approaching it and when you first get tastes of non-dual, it can be pretty crazy, right? But if somebody doesn't have counsel from a teacher who has walked this path before them, helping them through it, giving them the support they need, and they don't realize that, like, that's a fear response. It's a very intense, direct experience of fear. And they have a tendency to dissociate. They may dissociate, and they may get themselves into a dissociated state. And that's okay too. And there's help for that, right? Or it'll just probably relax itself over time. So that can happen, and that's okay, of course. Now, if someone were to, what can happen though is the insight itself, the insight that you may have just tasted, and it's not the insight's fault how you respond to it. How you respond to the insight is not the fault of the insight. It's not the fault of the Dharma. It's the fault of the avoidant self. It's the fault of the one that wants to be, that wants to be separate, the one that wants to be in control, the one that wants to have a personal experience apart from everything. Like that is the fundamental illusion. That part of us will not like it, right? That's going to fight this, or it can fight this. Again, with good counsel, good teacher, they show you how to work through that and to deconstruct it and see the beliefs inherent in it, to continue to process any repressed emotions that are coming up, or specifically unrecognized emotions like fear, such that you don't have a complete dorsal vagal shutdown. You don't have a massive fear response to it, and then which turns into a massive dissociation response. But even if you do, it's fine. Like, a dissociation response can happen, and you can work your way through it, right? And you might feel a lot better on the other side of that, right? So what happens with these insights, I find, is that on the other side of these insights, these shifts, even if it's just a momentary shift and it hasn't completely matured, is that there's a lot more clarity. There's always more clarity on the other side of the insights. What can happen, and I don't see this happen often, but what can happen, and it's happened with a few prominent people out there that I see, is something in them fights this in a big way. They just say, no to it. No, they just don't want it. They just fight it, and they run away from it, and they try to reconstitute a sort of mental self. And that can be made out of anything. It can be made out of a spiritual teacher. It can be made out of just completely, running away from this whole process or whatever. Now, you can't really stop the process, but you can try really hard, right? You can really fight this. And then, that can be kind of unfortunate. And instead of just letting the process continue to mature, take counsel from somebody who's walked this path before you, and the insight will deepen and mature, and you will find true freedom, true peace. But again, some people, they get right to that brink and it just freaks them out. And then they can, if they go out and talk about this in ways that are, that they're misunderstanding, they're unable to see the intricacies of what did happen and what didn't happen. And even what's going on in them, and then maybe some shadow stuff left, some competitiveness if they're talking about other teachers and, all this stuff going on, all of that stuff's going on, and it can be very confusing for them. But if they're going to go out and try to sort of make broad statements to people, they can really mislead people having gone through this, right? So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about it at the moment. I was talking to Josh about it. Maybe he'll make a response video as well. But I wish this person the best, and they clearly have good intentions. But if you've had an awakening in the last couple of years, and you're making these very, very broad statements about deep realization to people and all this, you're going to stir a lot of confusion. You're going to seed a lot of doubt. If you're actively seeding doubt out there, something's a little off probably. So maybe check in with that or whatever. But it is what it is. I don't wish anybody ill. I wish everybody, including this person, fruition, peace, clarity, and deep wisdom. The deep wisdom that comes with maturing spiritual insights. So I think that's about all I have to say for the moment. I'm sure people are going to have a lot of comments about this. I don't want to go into a bunch of details, but I think I wanted to get that off my chest just because I've had so many comments about this, and this stuff's been, whispered here and there, and now and then there's like public videos, and it just confuses people and it's unnecessary. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Controversy over.